It is my great pleasure to say that I am now joined by Imam Abdullah Hasan, who got involved with Imams Against Domestic Abuse, a conference which aimed to highlight the seriousness of this issue. Imam Hasan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Imam Hasan, why did you ask to be involved in this?
I mean, the main reason why I myself have been involved with raising awareness about domestic abuse, and particularly in the Muslim community and the wider community at large, is because for a number of perhaps years and decades, this issue has been swept under the carpet, and many imams have not really been able to tackle the issue in the community and try and educate the community about the severity of domestic abuse. And this is why I myself have been involved in trying to, and secondly, the main reason obviously is because Islam prohibits domestic abuse, any kind of abuse against one spouse. So it's our religious obligation as Imam, it's our religious obligation to, highlight that this is a prohibition, this is something that is completely wrong against Islam, and no spouse should be treated in a bad way.
Because, of course, recently, and we did a story on this, there was a charity set up in Scotland specifically to target this issue. And the women involved were saying that there were men who felt as though the Quran itself justified it. Now, there is some ambiguity over this, isn't there? This particular passage which deals with the right of a man eventually to strike his wife with a small, and there was some argument that we had on the show at the time that it was a small toothbrush-like stick. It's a very Arabic term. And some men had taken this to mean that they had carte blanche whenever their wife did something that annoyed them to hit them.
That's a complete misunderstanding of that particular verse. I mean, 434 does not refer to domestic violence or domestic abuse. When we talk about domestic abuse, we're not really referring to that particular verse. But given the fact that people do misunderstand the verse, I can categorically say, as an Imam and as a person who studied Islam from the original text of the Quran and from the Arabic language, and the life which is of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which is the explainer of the Quran. There's nothing in the Quran, there's nothing in Islam, there's nothing in the prophetic statements which justify domestic abuse or domestic violence in Islam.
So how difficult has it been to persuade imams who, let's face it, may not be comfortable? Because it is, in many ways, taking imams themselves out of their comfort zone, isn't it, Imam Hasan?
I mean, as with any other issue, tackling, for example, drugs,
social issues, yes.
Social issues, yeah. I mean, tackling drugs issues, tackling prostitution in our communities, and so on and so forth. It's a taboo issue, isn't it? And this issue is no different. So it has been difficult, and it is difficult, and this is something that I personally have found. But we are making some progress in terms of awakening the community, in particular the Muslim community, to this evil and vice within our community. And one thing I want to also make clear is that this is not a Muslim or Islamic issue.
Absolutely.
I mean, one in four women in the UK suffer from domestic abuse or violence. 3 women die from domestic violence. So this is not particular to the Muslim community. It's a human problem.
Just to make it clear as well, Imam, you probably didn't hear my introduction, but in my introduction, I was very categoric in stating that. But that is not to say that each community doesn't have the obligation to deal with its own community, and that's Sikh, Hindu, Christian, Jew, every community has an obligation to deal with this issue.
As imams, I've been imam for perhaps 5, 6, 7 years now, and it's an obligation. I see it's an obligation for me to personally deal with this issue. First, to educate the Muslim community about how a husband and wife should live together. And secondly, if there are any problems, how to remedy those problems within the Islamic narrative, and not use violence or not use abuse, which Islam completely prohibits.
Now, for an imam, and I've hosted so many phone-ins about domestic abuse, far more than I should ever need to, because we'd prefer, you and I, that we didn't need to talk about it because it didn't exist. But unfortunately, it does exist.
Unfortunately.
Some people complain that when the imams are being brought over from other countries and they don't understand socially. They've got a very black and white idea of the world and life, that they find it very difficult to talk to these people about anything other than the very strict knowledge that these guys have of the Quran and the Hadith, and that's it. How do you set about educating, re-educating an imam to be able to cope with these issues?
I mean, that is a very important question, a very good one also. That, but before I answer that, can I make a point that just because we have a lot of imams from the Indian subcontinent or abroad, does not mean that domestic they accept it, or because we have a lot of imams from abroad. Hence, we have a rise of domestic abuse. Domestic abuse, as I said, it's not particularly the Muslim community. It's a social, it's a human problem.
No, it's not linked in that way, Imam Hasan. The point is that they can't perhaps understand the lives that young British Asians are living, and that they feel that there's this age gap and this cultural gap between
that was the second point I was coming to. And you're right, there is a cultural gap, age gap, understanding of society. A lot of imams that I personally have come across when I was growing up in London, East London, that I could not relate to. They did not understand my language. They didn't understand their needs and the things that I was going through as a youth, as a young boy. And this is something to a large extent still continues in our societies in our day and age at the moment. But we are seeing a new trend now where young imams are studying in this country, who were born in this country, raised in this country, and they understand the social problems of this country, and they are trying to deal with it. But we have a long way to go. A lot of improvements need to be made, but there is some progress, but we need to obviously do more.
Okay. How big a problem is it? I mean, talking from a Muslim perspective, clearly it was big enough a problem for you to do a conference on it. How big a problem do you think it is?
It is a big problem. It's a massive problem. As I said, it's being swept under the carpet. Many Muslims, many imams, in fact, even, they would not really admit to the fact that this is a problem. They will just sweep it under the carpet. They will say to the women who approach them, or the men who are abused approach them, be patient, have patience, God will find a way. But they don't really give practical examples or practical remedies how they can resolve those problems. As you know, that there are many reasons why people fall into domestic abuse, why there are abusers, anger issues, psychological issues, mental issues. They've got problem in their workplace, problem in how they're not very sociable people. So they want to be controlling their spouse and so on and so forth. So imams are not really, some imams are not really equipped to deal with those kind of problems. When an abuser comes to them or the victim comes to them, and all they can say is, have patience and fear God, that's not enough. This is not what the scripture says. This is not what the prophetic hadith or prophetic statement tell us to do. We have to give practical answers to practical problems that people are facing.
And when a woman comes, or indeed a man, because sometimes men go through this as well, but let's be honest, the vast majority of victims of domestic abuse are women. When a woman comes to speak to an imam about this, what kind of advice should he be given? Should his first port of call be to say go to the police, or should he be able to act as a mediator between husband and wife, or wife and her in-laws?
Well, that will depend on the actual case and the individual that approaches the imam. Obviously, I deal with these issues every week. And
you do personally?
I do personally,
right. Yeah. So give us an example of the kind of advice you've had to give then.
From a general perspective, yes. Obviously individually I have to give the individual the case-by-case advice.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that categorically is, a lot of the times women, they approach me and they feel that they have done something wrong to deserve that kind of punishment, if you like, or abuse.
The man has made them feel that way, hasn't he?
Or the man psychologically has made them feel that way. And I say to them, look, no matter what you have done or supposed to have done in his eyes, your husband's eyes, he does not have a license in Islam or morally does not have any justification to raise his finger or even swear at you. And this is the first thing that I would say, just to counsel them, just to give them some psychological boost. And then depending on the actual scenario, I'll give them the appropriate advice and appropriate counselling.
Have you then ever had to speak directly to a man without his wife being there after she has accused him of doing this?
Domestic abuse I have, and there are a few cases that I have dealt with personally where the actual man has approached us and said, look, I have a problem. I get angry quick. I lose my temper quickly. So they actually acknowledge that they have a problem, and when people do that, then that means we can remedy them. We can give them the appropriate advice, appropriate counselling, and tackle the issue. If need be, we refer to professional counsellors, and they can have weekly or monthly sessions with them. If need be, I direct them to get legal advice for the victim. So depending on the situation and the case, we give them appropriate advice.
She comes to you, say for instance, and she is terrified of this man. She's also terrified of his reaction if someone else gets involved.
That's a very important question, a very good one. I mean, what we do, what I say, going through sustained abuse. We're not talking about a husband or wife, gets angry once or twice. We're talking about sustained abuse, sustained violence, and I have dealt with a lot of cases via email and also phone conversations where the exact example you gave I've dealt with. And what I would say, what I tell them again is that they need to do something about it. They can't suffer in silence, and Islam actually informs us or obligates us that we have to not just suffer in silence, we have to deal with it and take the appropriate means in trying to, take us away from that harm. And Islam says we should not harm, no harm should be come upon us.
I mean, because even though a man may wrongly argue that he has some Islamic justification, and you've clearly pointed out that he would be wrong in thinking that, this is
completely wrong.
This would be a psychological issue of his.
As I said, there are a number of reasons why abusers abuse their spouses. There could be psychological issue. They can be they experience this within their family at an early age or young age. It could be mental issue. It can be anger problems. So they need to go to anger management courses, anger management counseling sessions. So it could be a number of issues. If the perpetrator, if the abuser comes and acknowledges the mistake or the sin that he's or she's committing, then we can give them appropriate advice. If it's anger problem, I refer to them to counselors, professionals who are able to give them counseling sessions every week or every month. If there are people who need just basic advice, Islamic advice, then I'm able to do that also. So depending on the case, we refer to them to appropriate advice channels.
Okay. Imam Hasan, we will come back to you in a little while. Text has come in saying, I've suffered from domestic abuse for 10 years and have just come out of the marriage. I strongly, because the underlying attitudes are male-oriented, feel stronger. Imams are the right people to fight this, as they would be speaking directly to men. Imam Hasan? That makes sense, doesn't it?
I completely agree. The reason why I personally and the other 4 imams, we held that conference in London a week and a half ago, is because imams are at the forefront. They have access to a large member of the community. They go on the pulpit every Friday, and give lectures and sermons on various different aspects of Muslim life. So they have access to hundreds, if not thousands, of people every week. So Imam, they are in the position to educate the community about the Islamic position on domestic abuse and domestic violence, and completely and categorically say that it's not part of Islam. It's a big sin in Islam, major sin in Islam, to abuse or harm one's spouse. And personally, I've been involved with an organization in the last 3-4 years called Noor Charity, which is solely has been established to give advice and counseling and help victims of domestic abuse and domestic violence. And we've been organizing like a khutbah drive or sermons every year where we would ask or request the masjids or mosques all over the UK to talk about domestic abuse or domestic violence. So in that way, the people, they see the imams in the local community talk about domestic abuse and give them some Islamic prescriptions regarding that.
Okay. Now, this is a story, of course, that Asian Network Reports covered when it first happened, and at 1 o'clock, Asian Network Reports Today returns, of course, as it does every day, with Chetan Pathak, and we're going to have reaction to David Cameron's plans to impose tougher curbs on immigrants wanting to claim benefits in the UK. The Prime Minister says they can no longer expect something for nothing. Also, it's something we talked about on the phone in this morning, the return to Pakistan of former President Pervez Musharraf. We have the latest on how his return is going down in the country, and we'll hear from the singer-actor Ali Zafar, who's been wowing fans in London during an appearance. Coming up on Asian Network Reports with Chetan Pathak at 1. It is 52 minutes past 12. You're listening to me, Nihal, on the BBC Asian Network. And we've got about 7.5 minutes left of the show. And it is my pleasure to say that I'm joined by Imam Abdullah Hasan. We were talking before the track about domestic abuse and what imams can do to stop it happening. But, of course, it is the responsibility of all of us, hence those MTV adverts that I was talking about earlier, where people were encouraged to spot domestic abuse early on and do something about it and help and support people that you feel are going through it. Unlike perhaps Imam Hasan, other communities, the Asian community does have this whole worry about shame and what will the community think if I am to divorce. And I've heard plenty of stories on this show where parents have told their daughters to go back to abusive husbands and just put up with it. What do you advise when you hear that? Imam Hasan, have we lost Imam Hasan?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Ah, there we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Okay.
I mean, the example you gave, I mean, I received so many like this, where a woman would approach me and she would say she has been going through sustained domestic abuse for not a week, not a month, but for years, and has come to the stage where she cannot no longer bear it. She approaches her family, and the family say, if you go to the police, if you call a meeting with the family, and your husband is exposed, then he will divorce you, and it will be shame, embarrassment upon the family. And they say to the daughter, and go back to your husband and be patient, which is so unfortunate. And I know I listen to women who cry on the phone to me, and they say that my father or my family are not doing anything about it. What do I do? And it makes me cry also, because it's really, really sad that as a human being, as a community, we can let this happen. What is shameful is that we let our daughters go through this. What is shameful is that we let our wives go through this. That is more shameful, more embarrassment to our community, to the human race. Not because we sweep it under the carpet. It's really, really unfortunate. But what I tend to normally say is that that she should try and educate the parents and try and involve people within her family that they can support her, give her assistance. And if she is going through, and sometimes I receive cases where the woman is not only abused verbally, but violently she is being abused day in, day out, to the extent that blood is coming out from her body, from her eyes, from her face, from her different parts of the body. Now she cannot be patient at that moment. She needs to go to the police. She needs to go to the authorities and take appropriate measures in trying rescue herself from that situation.
It's really fascinating that you said it's actually more of an embarrassment to allow this to go on than it is. It
is disgusting.
Yeah.
I can't find the word. It's disgusting.
Couldn't agree with you more.
It's disgusting. How can a father who should love and protect the daughter say to her, go back to your husband who's kicking you, go back to your husband who's abusing you, go back to your husband who's treating you like a dog? It's disgusting. And that father does not deserve to be called a father, in my opinion.
Well, I am a father of a daughter, and I certainly wouldn't do that. I can assure you.
I'm glad.
I can assure you of that. And in fact, whoever laid a finger on my daughter would be in a serious amount of trouble.
No one will blame you. I mean, it's disgusting. I'm telling you.
And it's disgusting that it's still so widespread in all communities, isn't it? This idea that, because I've heard it from Sikhs, from Hindus, from Muslims, from all different backgrounds in the Asian community.
As I said, 1 in 4 women in the UK suffer. 2 to 3 women die from domestic violence, and unfortunately, our government is not doing much to help. They're reducing they're not really funding charities that are in the forefront of helping victims of domestic violence. They're cutting down on funding. So, when we have these funding cuts from the government, and we have other organizations who are voluntary, the organization that I am involved with from the Muslim community, Noor, and other mosques who are involved with tackling domestic violence, all voluntary. We have our own full-time job, we have our other, family issues and so on and so forth to take care of. But, we're doing voluntary. So I think the government needs to do more, give more funding to those charities who are working in the front line in tackling this sick and vile problem in our community.
And, I mean, have you encountered any opposition, predominantly, I can imagine, from men saying, you shouldn't be meddling in our domestic affairs. We come to learn about Islam from you. You just tell us about Islam. Don't get involved in our domestic issues.
I personally have, where men have approached me and emailed me and contacted me through phone and said, why are you spending your time in this? This is not a problem in our community. This is because we are living in a community or society where it's westernized. There's music culture, there's Hollywood culture, Bollywood culture, nothing to do with Islam. And I tell them, look, this is something. It's not particular to Islam, or it's not particular to the West. It's not particular to Christianity or Judaism. It's a human problem.
Yes.
And we need to tackle it like that, like drugs, like prostitution, like any crime. Domestic abuse is a crime. Domestic violence, a man who hits his wife or vice versa, is a crime, and we need to deal with it appropriately.
Harjinder Singh has texted in saying, respect to this Imam for taking on the challenge. Our local Sikh community is also tackling the crime within the Sikh community, making people aware of how to deal with it and what their options are and how to deal with the issues. I wish this Imam good luck in his efforts. Hi Nihal, I must say, you've got me through all my morning in the library. I was wondering if I could get the respected Imam's number, as I have an issue I need to discuss, and get some guidance in regards to it. Now, of course, we're not going to give out your number to anyone who gets in contact with us, but it does raise a point about how can people engage with this process? How can they get in contact with people such as you in order to get advice?
As I said, there are some fantastic institution organizations who are working in the front line. Muslim and non-Muslim organizations who are working within the different various parts of the UK in helping victims of domestic abuse and domestic violence. From a Muslim perspective, and those that I'm aware of, there are a number of institution organizations within the UK who are trying to help domestic violence victims. One, as I mentioned, is Noor, a domestic violence charity. If you go on the internet and Google and type Noor, Nour, you'll find our contact.